We all know a new budget MacBook is in the works, but the big question on everyone's mind right now is, will it actually release this year? Rumours have been swirling about an entry-level MacBook that could start as low as $599, and some reports have hinted at a late 2025 launch. That's right now, so where is it? Well, if you're hoping to see this under a Christmas tree, I wouldn't get too excited. My take? Apple isn't bringing this MacBook out in 2025. If they had plans for a holiday launch, it would have come alongside the 14-inch MacBook Pro in October. Instead, the more likely scenario is that we're going to see this low-end MacBook in spring next year, probably alongside the M5 MacBook Air. Sure, Apple could still announce other products later in the year, like the Apple TV 4K or the HomePod Mini 2, but the budget MacBook, that's a spring 2026 affair in my opinion, but I could be wrong. Let's now delve into everything we know about this MacBook though. Back in June, analyst Min-Chiu Kuo first revealed that Apple's working on a more affordable 13-inch laptop aimed to compete with Chromebooks and capture buyers at the lower end of the MacBook market. What's really interesting is that this device isn't going to run on the M series chipsets. Instead, it's going to be using the A18 Pro. Yes, the same processor that debuted in the iPhone 16 Pro last year. What's Apple doing putting an iPhone chip in a Mac? On paper that might sound like a downgrade, but zoom out and it does make sense. The A18 Pro is around 40% slower than Apple's M4 chipset, but its multi-core CPU performance is basically the same as the original M1 MacBook Air from 2020. For graphics, it does actually outperform the M1 in some tests, and so in other words, for students, casual users, and anyone doing everyday activities like browsing, streaming, or working in Office and Google Docs, this chip is more than fine, and the pricing, Digitimes reports that this low-cost MacBook could start between $599 and $699. That's a massive shift for Apple, whose current 13-inch MacBook Air starts at $999 in the US, though the M1 powered 2020 Air still sells for $599 at retailers like Walmart, so this is a spiritual successor to that machine. Apple seems to be targeting a budget range that directly competes with Chromebooks, which dominate US school sales largely because they're cheap and function enough for education. But here's the advantage Apple brings: full macOS, long-term software updates, and proper desktop class performance, all for roughly the same price as a mid-range MacBook. Design-wise, this MacBook is expected to be ultra-thin and lightweight. Rumors suggest a slightly smaller 12.9-inch display, a middle ground between the 12-inch MacBook from 2015 and the current 13.6-inch MacBook Air, along with color options like silver, blue, pink, and yellow. So I'm assuming this will be recycling the same color options the base iPad comes in, which I'm fine with. Those are some pretty snazzy shades. Apple has already produced a ton of A18 Pro chipsets for iPhones, so Apple doesn't need to keep around older chip production lines. This gives them scale efficiency, reduce costs, and protect margins, something Tim Cook loves to do. And as I said, the A18 Pro should deliver roughly the same performance as the original M1, which is still more than enough for 4K editing, light design work, and everyday computing. Heck, I still use an M1 MacBook Air every single day, but because this has a modern neural engine, it's future-proof for Apple's AI features, so it's ready for whatever enhancements come to macOS down the line. Now, the display being 12.9 inches is actually quite interesting because that does suggest Apple's designing a new chassis rather than recycling old shells, which is unusual for base models. Most would think Apple just reused the M1 shell and call it a day, but no, this could actually have a new design, and this new size should balance portability with usability, small enough to carry everywhere but not so tiny that typing or multitasking becomes uncomfortable. I mean, the iPad Pro used to roughly be 12.9 inches, so yeah, this is a great size option. And yeah, the color options make sense for the target market because students love fun colors. Give them bright, shiny toys and they're gonna buy it immediately. And do remember, we don't get many fun colors with the other MacBooks. Personally, I'd love to see Apple go bold with these colors like they do with the iPad. A deep rich blue or vibrant pink that actually pops on the desk would make this machine feel fun and distinct. Now, before we dive in deeper, if you're into this kind of Apple news, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the hype button below. It really helps a small channel like mine reach more Apple fans, and you'll never miss my latest breakdowns on Apple's upcoming products. Anyway, the MacBook strategic positioning is worth noting because this is a Tim Cook masterclass. At $599 to $699, this undercuts the MacBook Air by hundreds of dollars, while still delivering far more capability than a Chromebook. That's a strong entry point into Apple's ecosystem for students, first-time buyers, or anyone looking for a portable laptop without spending a fortune. And even with some compromises like the lack of Thunderbolt ports, 8 gigs of RAM, or single external display supports, it's a proper Mac, it still runs the full version of macOS. Apple's always had a knack for balancing compromises with appeal. Look at the Apple Watch SE 3 or the base iPads, and this seems to be a similar strategy. I know Apple sometimes misses when it comes to their base products like the iPhone 16e, that wasn't so great, but this should be as good as the base iPad and the Apple Watch SE. Now let's break down these compromises. No Thunderbolt support means slow external drives and few options for multiple 6K panels, though let's be honest, which student has multiple 6K panels lying around? But RAM is probably the biggest deal breaker. It's likely going to start with 8 gigs, which is enough for everyday usage, but not ideal for more heavier workflows like professional video editing, and ultimately does limit the longevity of the machine. Though I'm expecting Apple to offer a 16 gig option for a higher price. GPU performance also lagged behind the M4 MacBook Air, and being Apple, expect at least one controversial mission that gets all the PC fanboys rolled up. That's obviously going to push people towards higher-end devices. Maybe no Touch ID, or maybe no True Tone. There's going to be some sort of deal breaker for the techies, but for what it's meant to be, a lightweight, colourful, ultra-portable, entry-level Mac for students, those trade-offs are reasonable. The market potential here is huge, guys. DigiTimes projects annual sales of 5 to 7 million units, which could increase MacBook shipments by up to 40%. That's a huge growth opportunity, especially in a stagnant PC market. By targeting the sub $700 segment, Apple could pull customers away from Chromebooks and Windows laptops while still maintaining strong margins. Plus, unlike Chromebooks, this device, again, as I said, offers full macOS functionality, access to pro software, and of course long-term support. All things budget-conscious buyers may have not expected from Apple. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. Historically, Apple has dipped into the budget Mac segment before. The white polycarbonate MacBook from the late 2000s was designed for students, starting at $999 but often discounted. The 12-inch Retina MacBook wasn't so low budget, it was $1299, which was quite expensive, but it aimed to be ultra thin and ultra portable, but unfortunately it was too underpowered for the price. The iBook in the early 2000s was another attempt at a student Mac, but it never really got as low as Chromebook level pricing. This new A18 MacBook, however, if priced between $599 to $699, would finally give Apple a true entry-level laptop without feeling like a toy. It could bring the portability of the 12-inch Retina MacBook that everyone loves into a package that's actually useful and affordable. It's not going to be underpowered, guys. The A18 Pro is still a powerhouse. And let's not forget the price versus performance equation. While this won't replace a professional M4 MacBook Air, the performance is adequate for most students, office workers, and casual users, and there's a chance for Apple to get a slice of the lower-end market, which has historically been dominated by Chromebooks and budget Windows laptops. So again, for $599, M1 level performance is more than fine. A $599 MacBook may also encourage schools and universities to consider Macs again. I remember iMacs being popular in schools, and also the polycarbonate MacBook, I remember using that back in school. But recently, it's all been Chromebooks. Of course, this also raises the question, what happens to the iPad in this price range? The iPad has always been Apple's answer to, I want a cheap computer, but it's never really fully replaced a laptop for most consumers. If a $599 MacBook now exists, it could cannibalize some iPad sales, but Apple probably doesn't care if it means keeping people in the macOS ecosystem instead of losing them to Windows or Chrome OS. So what's the takeaway? Apple's low-cost A18 MacBook is a strategic, fun, and highly affordable addition to the range. It may not have Thunderbolt ports or a pro-grade CPU or tons of RAM, but it's a full macOS device in a colourful, ultra-portable package that's going to sell millions annually. This is going to be a very popular machine. Will it launch this year though? My verdict, no. Patience will be required until spring 2026, when it can make its proper debut alongside the M5 MacBook Air. Later in the year, we might see other Apple releases, like the Apple TV 4K or the HomePod Mini 2, but for this entry-level MacBook, the countdown isn't until winter, it's until spring. So what do you think? Would you buy a MacBook with an iPhone chipset if it meant saving $300 to $400 compared to the MacBook Air? Does the price outweigh the compromises, or do you stick with an M-series device instead? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, hitting that subscribe button and hype button really helps a small channel like this, and there's a lot more coming your way as Apple prepares for the next generation of devices. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.